Hello everyone, and welcome to the Third Impact Anime Podcast. I am for once your host, Bill. I am really excited today because only one catchphrase prevails. And today we are talking about one of my favorite franchises, Detective Conan. And with me is a junior sleuth himself, Austin.
Hey, I'm really excited to be talking about James Cameron's Titanic.
Yeah, you could see a little ties with that, but maybe came a little bit later.
that will make sense in time, dear audience.
Yeah, in time. But before we get to Conan, or Case Closed in America, why don't we do a little bit of catch-up and see what we've been watching or playing? So, Austin, what have you been watching as of late?
Well, I had the distinct pleasure recently of being a guest on the Film Buds podcast. It's a podcast that is ran by a friend of mine back from undergrad that I knew, and he's been doing that. He's been he's taken over from the original host, but he's been hosting the podcast for probably about the last year or so. And they've been doing they're like a general like film and TV podcast, mostly film. And recently for the holiday season, which we're recording this now on December 9th of 2021, they have been doing like a series of episodes on like holiday films. Like the one that they just did was on Hanukkah films, which there's like a shockingly few amount of. So they were subjected to having to discuss Adam Sandler's 8 Crazy Nights, which is just a absolute mess of a film. But anyway, the episode that I was on was their like international Christmas episode. So they talked about Tokyo Godfathers. And because I have no shame, I just invited myself on because I really like that movie. And I'm pretty sure the last time that we talked about Tokyo Godfathers, I wasn't even on that episode. So I have never talked about Tokyo Godfathers on a podcast before. So that was really fun for them to let me on and chat about that for a while. So that was really cool. Rewatching Tokyo Godfathers is always a treat, and I got to rewatch the new dub for the first time. So that was cool.
Yeah, the new dub I think was pretty excellently done.
Yeah.
I have no complaints with it.
No, I really like it. Yeah.
That movie it's a great movie in that I could probably rewatch it over and over again because it's probably Satoshi Kon's most easily digestible plot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fun kind of romp of happenstance and mystery and set at Christmas time. So you should go watch it if you haven't.
I think it really captures that essence of Christmas magic probably better than like 50% of American produced Christmas films, which is wild because it's like created in a totally non-traditionally Christian Christmas interpretation.
Right, because in Japan, Christmas is more like a Valentine's romantic holiday, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not really. So I do think it's interesting that it captures like the, not to be trite, but like the true meaning of Christmas. It captures that a lot better than like probably most of what you could expect to come out from here.
What are you telling me, that a Hallmark movie doesn't tell me the true meaning of Christmas? You're blowing my mind, Austin.
Whenever the lady from New York moves to the small town to marry the football rancher man and stuff,
the Christmas tree magnet.
Yeah, whenever they find a baby in a garbage can and have to not take it to its home, you get back to me. I don't know where I was going with that.
It's fine. Those Hallmark movies are very confounding at times. So. Yeah. I don't blame
you. They've got their brand. They've found their formula. It's like their version of the isekai formula. It just people eat it up for some reason.
Pretty much, where it's a small town girl that when moved to the big city comes back to the small town and it's like has lost the meaning of the holidays because she's so busy with work.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not a Hallmark movie podcast.
There are some.
I bet there are. I bet there's a niche where it's like a host and a comedian talking about them somewhere. Probably in the greater city of LA. But as for anime related things, I finished Netflix Bebop.
You finished it. Congratulations.
Yep. I was a trooper and got through it. I have some strong disagreements about what they attempted to do.
I know I've only watched half of the show myself, but I can probably guess that I'm going to agree with like 95% of all of your issues with the show.
I think like superficially it looks fine. Like the visuals, the music, I think they're fine. John Cho is fine, and I think the general cast is fine. It's mostly the writing is really, really not great.
Yeah, like I said something to this effect on Twitter as I was watching the first 5 episodes, but I was just like, man, if they took out like every second or third joke from the show and like just removed every single scene where Vicious is present, I think it would be a much better show.
Yeah, and I think the other problem is just the characterizations are so off. Where I know they wanted to not do a carbon copy and try to do something a bit different.
Yeah.
But just the changes feel off. Like how Vicious, especially Vicious, is done, where in the original anime he's mysterious and he's basically just a shadow. Where you don't know anything about him. You just know that he wants to kill Spike. Whereas in this one, he's much more emotionally volatile and very whiny at times.
Yeah.
And man, that wig is not doing him any favors.
Not at all.
And I understood what they tried to do with Faye, because they probably were afraid, like, oh, if we make her too flirty, then people might say we're just doing eye candy. And I get they wanted to get away with from that, but they made her too much into what I think is a bit too much foul mouth. Like I'm not a prude, and that cursing's fine, but when it's every 3 seconds, and when she's very much like in the girl boss TM mode, I'm like, can you just stop, please?
No,
stop.
I will say I feel like the whole like the just ratcheting up the cursing and the foul language, and again, I'm not inherently against that, but like it makes it feel like they're trying to do like some sort of Tarantino impersonation, but it all just rings so hollow. It just feels like, oh, we're just trying to throw in all of this foul language in just because we can. And I'm not saying that these people wouldn't use tons of foul language, but like if you watch the show, it sounds really excessive.
Yeah, it sounds very much like a teenager was kind of like, we can do this? Let's go crazy!
Exactly.
And when you get older, that just kind of like cursing is part of your vernacular, but it's not every 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Which is not great. And I would also say that while I like Jet and the actor, him being super grumpy every 5 seconds
constantly
is really grating. Like, he would get that way in the original show at times, but he seemed more even keel than that in that version, or that script.
Yeah.
For the English cast, whereas in this one, he's basically Danny Glover in the Lethal Weapon movie. Is like, I'm getting too old for this shit. So Spike, my daughter.
And it's also not like Spike and Jet didn't like bicker a lot in the original show. I mean, they definitely did, but and again, I'm only speaking from watching half of it, but like it seems like they're just constantly like at each other's throat about everything, just nonstop. It's like they don't ever really calm down.
Or that Jet is basically on pins and needles like every single moment of the day.
Right.
And that makes it just not fun for me. I really like the actor. I think the actor's good, but it's just they've just gotten such bad dialogue, and with the quippiness too. The Josh Whedon quippiness has still not gone away from the Hollywood writers vernacular. And
Yeah. No, I completely agree. But speaking of Mustafa Shakir specifically, like, not that he needs to, but there were times where, like, I felt like I could close my eyes and just hear Bo Billingsley because, like, the way he played Jet sounded like super similar to the original performance.
yeah, I would totally agree with that.
And yeah, I mean,
But
I'm kind of with you too. It's like I don't have anything against like the performances necessarily, but it's the pacing and the writing that just kind of grind my gears. It feels like it's not going anywhere. And with the stuff that with Vicious that they sort of expounded upon, it's like they were trying to make it go somewhere, but in that specific context, I just don't care. I just don't care.
and I'll also say, like, a mystery, when it's presented to an audience, whatever they create in their mind is going to be better than whatever you decide to write.
Yeah, that's kind of
and
the
that
whole appeal of the original show. It's like you get like little glimpses of like Spike's life from beforehand and all that stuff, but and like with characters like Faye, it's like you don't really know what's going on with her until the very, very end. But like in the very beginning of this show, they straight up say like in maybe the first or second episode that Faye is like they like basically lay out her entire thing like right there. It's like she has amnesia, she was frozen, all that stuff. They just like kind of put it right out in your face from the get-go, and I'm just like I thought kind of the appeal of these characters was they were kind of mysterious.
Yeah, and just that morsel of giving you hints about their characters made you engage and want you to learn more about them.
Yeah.
Whereas if I just gave an info dump of my main characters, then I'm like, this is way too much information for me to process, and I don't care.
But the longer the script, with with more dialogue, you can make longer episodes for cheaper, and Netflix probably loves that.
Well, knowing Netflix, they will probably give this a second season and then say we're done. Because that's how Netflix rolls, of just like, unless it's a huge breakout hit, to keep things cheap, it's either 2 seasons or less.
Hey folks, this is Editing Austin here, chiming in to say that unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it looks like we won't be getting a second season of the Netflix Cowboy Bebop because about a day after we recorded this episode, Netflix decided to cancel the show. So it looks like that's all we're going to get, and maybe that's for the best. But there was also some other Cowboy Bebop related news. About a day after Netflix announced the cancellation, the passing of Keiko Nobumoto was also announced. She passed away at age 57 on December 1st, and they announced her death a few days afterwards. She was one of the main scriptwriters for Cowboy Bebop, in addition to Tokyo Godfathers, and she was the original creator of Wolf's Rain, and she worked on Samurai Champloo and Macross Plus and a whole bunch. She was a very frequent collaborator with Shinichiro Watanabe, and we lost her way too soon. We really appreciate all of the wonderful work that she's leaving behind, and we send our sincerest regards to her friends and family. She's really a titan of anime's screenwriting, and it's really sad that we've lost her at such a young age. But yeah, just wanted to chime in and add those two addendums, and now back to the show.
This isn't over, Austin. We have the One Piece adaptation, which
Aren't you so excited?
I'm so scared. I am so scared because it's by the same studio that is doing the Bebop adaptation. And even though Oda is involved, I don't trust it. And they're doing a Yu Yu Hakusho adaptation too, because 90s, and people with 90s now have buying power, right?
Yeah.
And I think didn't they also announce they're doing a Gundam thing? And
Yes.
they're going to do a Sailor Moon thing too?
Oh, really?
So they're hitting like all the big 90s nostalgia points at this point. And they previously did the Death Note movie, which we won't speak about. So yeah, this is becoming a thing.
I think the one that has the potential to be the most successful is the Gundam one, because the Gundam universe is really big, and if they wanted to just tell like a simple story using the context of Gundam, like with the Federation and the Zeon and stuff like that, I think that's probably more doable and the likelihood of being more successful. But then again, I am also thinking that they're really going to scrimp on the special effects and the robots might not look all that good. So at that point, like, why would you want to do it if it can't look good?
And the other thing too is because it's Gundam, there's gonna be way too many cooks in the kitchen working on that script.
They should just let
Because
Tomino write it. At least then it would be weird and interesting.
it'll be weird. I don't. It would be either weird and interesting or hair pulling. And I mean, maybe this would make Tamina's dream come true of like I can finally be a filmmaker.
I'm not an anime director. I'm a filmmaker.
I'm a I'm a filmmaker. So yeah, this will be sadly an ongoing trend, and I will probably do an episode on the One Piece live action show when that comes out, where you'll just hear me just get into a morph ball and just be really sad.
And I will say, I mean, there's always the possibility that if there's enough interest in the group, we could do another episode on the Cowboy Bebop live action movie. No promises. I mean, not live action movie, the series, but I mean, no promises. But that might be in the future as well.
Maybe, although
Maybe.
I don't want that episode just might be just a spewing of sadness and disappointment.
Probably. We've never actually covered the original series, so we should do that sometime.
Yeah, or maybe like the movie.
Yeah,
That'd be fun.
the sky's the limit. But actually, speaking of Netflix, there was a quick news item that I wanted to talk about. Netflix just this week announced a new project with Wit Studio, the folks behind Attack on Titan and The Ancient Magus Bride and Cabaneri of the Iron Fortress. They are doing a new Netflix original anime film that comes out next year in April with our boy Gen Urobuchi in the writer's chair and the director of Attack on Titan, Tetsuro Araki, directing it, and it's called Bubble. And it looks pretty interesting. They put out a teaser for it, and it has a lot of talent attached to it. Like Hiroyuki Sawano is doing the music, so it sounds like they just got a whole bunch of fairly well-known people together and said, "Hey, make a thing." And I'm all for that. Like, if this comes out and it's like really bad, at least I think it will be bad in like an interesting way. But like a lot of the stuff that these folks have worked on, I've really enjoyed. So I'm actually kind of hyped for this. The trailer makes it look really neat. A lot of people online are comparing it to like Gravity Rush in at least concept, where it plays with like gravity and like space and movement and stuff like that. And that sounds like a really fun sort of visual medium to play in. So I don't know. I mean, if Netflix throws more money towards projects like this, then I'm all for it. It sounds like it might be a cool thing to look out for.
I think that's going to be our theme for the episode today. Is just Netflix is just throwing the money around. Like on top of that, they basically bought the exclusive rights to the new Jojo series.
They
Stone
did. Oh my
Ocean.
gosh. And yes, and it's so good. JoJo's is back, and Stone Ocean is so much fun.
It's so fun. It's so sad because my friend and we marathoned it in like 2 days. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
we're at a JoJo now.
Yeah, they
What do we
dropped
do?
they dropped the first 12 episodes, and then I guess in a few months they'll do another 12 and then finish it up a few months after that. I guess that's
Yeah,
what they'll do.
because JoJo is usually around like 39, 38 episodes usually. So yeah, I expected that we're gonna probably get 12 episode batches every couple of months.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. I mean, so far, I've only seen like the first 2 episodes so far, but like Jolene is just a riot. She's such a fun lead character, and knowing that it's like all centering around like a prison basically means that there is like an endless possibility of like insane scenarios and people that she can come across and have to deal with. So I'm really looking forward to watching more of Stone Ocean.
Yeah, and without going into too much spoilers, I'll say I like most JoJo things. The fights are great, and I like the premise of this JoJo series,
Mm-hmm.
where it doesn't feel as wandering as some of the other past series.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's no bad JoJo, but certain JoJo seasons were more focused than others. So,
Yeah, I would agree
so
with that. I think all JoJo's is pretty consistent in quality. It's just like some of them are a little bit more engaging than others.
mhm.
Like I like Golden Wind, but I think it's probably one of the like more I don't know slow series. Like it's very slow build.
Mm.
But the cast of characters is really great. Like Giorno, I think is kind of weak himself, but I really like his gang, like the characters around him. So even when JoJo's is like quote unquote at its weakest, like I still think that there's a lot to like there.
Yeah, and like most things, I think everyone interprets things differently. Like for
Sure.
me, Diamond is Unbreakable was my l- slowest one that I
Mm-hmm.
had trouble engaging with, but it was still good. Um, so yeah, if you haven't noticed already, you should go watch JoJo.
Mm-hmm.
It's excellent across the board. Well, I think we've done enough catching up. Why don't we get into our main topic today, which is Detective Conan? We're here. We're gonna. I am a huge Detective Conan fan, and that I have watched most of the TV series and all the movies. Yes, I'm insane. Uh, and I wanted to see how it would go for a more of a newer person of the franchise, which is my friend and my co-host Austin.
Hey, that's me.
Yep. So I decided to send him one of the movies because most of the movies you can just enter into it without knowing really any continuity and just enjoy it for what it is. But before we get into the movie, why don't I give a little background on what Detective Conan is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for this episode, it's mainly going to be Bill regaling you with all of everything that you need to know to get started with Detective Conan, and me being obtuse. So please proceed, our fearless leader.
Okay. Well, we'll see if I can lead us through the way so that we don't get lost in the weeds. Uh, well, little background. So, Detective Conan was created by Goyo Ashima. He grew up wanting to be an art teacher, but in his college years, a friend of his suggested that he submit some of his work for a manga contest, which he received an honorable mention, which inspired him to become a manga artist. After a few years of struggling, he saw another contest for Shonen Sunday, which, funny enough, Austin does not come out on Sunday.
What?
Comes out on Tuesdays, and then
What?
they moved it to Wednesdays.
I literally had no idea.
Yes, and
Everything is a lie. What do days of the week even mean anymore?
I, it's. I know what I'm going to declare today. Even though we're recording this on a Wednesday, I'm declaring today Sunday.
All
It's
right.
all in my head. uh, and also, just uh, people should know this is not tied to Weekly Shonen Jump. This is another magazine. A lot of them use very similar naming conventions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's because I thought it was tied to when I first got into Conan. I thought it was tied to Shonen Jump, but nope, I was
Yeah,
wrong.
a lot of the manga magazines have like somewhat similar names with like weekly shonen or shojo something in it, but they're all mostly separate.
Yeah. Well, his first series was Magic Kaito, who would later become a recurring character in Conan, aka Kaito Kid. It's funny, his editors thought that Magic Kaito would not be that successful, and he said if it sold over 100,000 copies, he'd get him lunch, which it did. Um,
Wow, just one
and
lunch for 100,000 copies.
and Kaito is very much based on the Arsène Lupin character, So that character has inspired many of my favorite franchises, surprisingly.
Hmm.
Uh, in 1994, his editors at Shonen Sunday asked him to create a mystery series to kind of compete with the teen mystery craze, which was going on at the time. Um, so he said sure, and came up with the idea of Conan in 2 weeks. Uh, I take that. I think he just says that. I find it hard to believe that you would be able to create $1 billion franchise in 2 weeks, because this Conan makes some serious money. Uh, so a little bit of background: Detective Conan has been running since 1994. It is still going today with over 100 volumes and counting. Uh,
Is it still
it
all being written by Oyama?
Yeah, it's still written by him, but I imagine that I don't know what his level of assistance help is,
Mm-hmm.
because any major mangaka usually has like an army of assistants that helps them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he might have that same sort of setup. Um, an anime adaptation by my favorite studio, TMS, has been running since 1996, with a Conan movie coming out every year since 1997, usually during the Golden Week of Japan. And funny enough, sadly, the streak was broken thanks to COVID, where
No.
they missed last year and decided to delay the movie by a year, so that way people can go see it in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
So sadly their streak was broken, but
Well, they have a very good excuse.
very good one. But I gave you all this background. But what is the premise of Detective Conan?
So
The
it's
premise.
it's Arnold Schwarzenegger from the Conan the Barbarian movie, but he's a detective, right?
I don't know if Conan the Barbarian would have the intelligence and the wisdom to investigate these cases. He'd be like, I just punch, you go to jail. But the premise is a young teenage detective named Sunichi Kudo, uh, who works with the police and is top of his game, takes a trip with his best friend slash love interest, Ran, at a amusement park called Tropical Land, where he sees two mysterious figures uh, kind of go off into the distance as he solved the case. And as he's kind of observing them, they find out about him, knock him out, and make him take a mysterious pill, which they believed was going to kill him, but actually shrunk him down to the size of a child.
That is a
Uh,
wild swerve. Like, in theory, if they were trying to give him like cyanide and it accidentally backfired and it turned him into a child, like I think that they just had a massive scientific discovery.
uh, and so now, under the pseudonym of Conan Edogawa, he lives with Ran and her private detective father, Mori, keeping his identity secret from Ran to keep her safe, uh, while he tries to uncover the mystery of the organization known as the Black Organization and get back to normal.
No relation to Kingdom Hearts.
Well, this beat Kingdom Hearts by a few years, so take
That's
that, Kingdom
true.
Hearts.
Now I'm assuming like the reason his name is Conan Edogawa is like it's a combination between Arthur Conan Doyle and Edogawa Ranpo. Like that's what I would assume, right?
Yes, you're
Mm-hmm.
exactly right.
Right. Makes sense to me.
Um, but to make things even simpler, the main premise with the Black Organization isn't really the focus of our movie. Uh, the um, but before we get into the movie, I guess you haven't had any experience with Conan before, have you, Austin?
So this was a number of years ago, but at my favorite used bookstore, I found a copy of the first season of Conan on DVD that Funimation had put out, probably in like the mid 2000s or so, and I just picked it up because I was like, "Oh, this franchise I've heard of for a very long time," and I thought, "Well, you know what? I'll give it a try." And I watched the first episode, and that's all. I do not have that box set anymore. I enjoyed the first episode, but at the time, and probably still even now, I just don't think it's something that I really want to dive full bore into, even though, as we'll get into later, I did enjoy this movie. So
Yeah,
that's really my familiarity with Conan, beyond sort of you filling me in along your journey of you getting into Conan.
that was mostly due to like most things, my friend Michael, where he had a nostalgia connection to Conan because the Funimation dub, I think, ran on G4,
Hmm.
or the Anime Network, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he grew up watching the dub
Mm-hmm.
and had nostalgia for it. And after One Piece, we needed another long franchise to do.
Oh gosh.
So we decided to do Conan, and it took about a year.
Is
But we,
Is Conan longer than One Piece? It is, isn't it?
um, no, One Piece is slightly longer in terms of manga.
What
It's
about
only
anime?
anime. Conan's a little bit longer.
Okay. Yeah, because
Um,
you said it started in what? The anime started in what year?
1996.
Okay, so yeah, that's like 3 years before One Piece started.
Yeah, so they're close in length,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, unlike One Piece, Conan is, I think, much more approachable because you can pretty much join in on any case that you want, and you don't really need to know the continuity as hard as you do with One Piece because it's very much case of the week of Conan and crew go to someplace, usually in Baker City, uh, and a crime occurs, and then Conan has to solve it. So it's much more approachable, I would argue, than One Piece is, because with One Piece it's a one continuous story with the plot progressing, whereas this one is very much case of the week
Mm-hmm.
with occasional story progression.
Mm.
Um, And I'd say, with your experience with Conan and Austin, it's very similar to a lot of people in America. Because Detective Conan slash Case Closed never really took off. Um, it's called Case Closed in America, I think mostly to avoid copyright issues because of the author Conan Doyle name.
Mm-hmm.
So they changed it to Case Closed, and it's under a lot of different names in different countries. But in America, Funimation tried Detective Conan out in around 2004, where they put out the first 4 seasons of Conan, which is about 130 episodes, and the first 6 movies. And as I know, a couple people have nostalgia for the dub, like Colin Clinkenbeard, who is a known voice actor, is the voice of Ran in the Conan Funimation dub.
I'm pretty sure she's Winry in Full Metal Alchemist.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
she's Lilith in the Borderlands games.
Oh, nice.
Um, but yeah, she's in there, and a couple other Funimation regulars at the time are in that dub. I think Mike McFarlane is.
Oh, he's in everything.
He's in. I think he's in there playing Mori. I'm probably wrong, so you can
Mm-hmm.
correct me, Twitter. Uh, but it never really connected. I think because at the time it was a different approach in dubbing because they changed, excluding Conan's name, they changed all the Japanese names into English,
Mm.
and like instead of Ran Mori, it's Rachel Moore.
Mm. You know, I can see that if you're talking about the mid 2000s, this was just coming out of an era where dubbing companies and localizers thought that that was sort of a necessity because like the Deke dub of Sailor Moon wasn't too many years prior to this time period where they changed everybody's name.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the other thing too is unlike something like One Piece or Bleach, where it's a lot of heavy action and movement. Conan is very much, it's a very heavy dialogue show.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as action oriented, so it's hard to engage a younger audience that would potentially try it out.
Which that seems interesting to me. I mean, maybe that's just the difference in priorities between, I don't know, I hate to make generalizations, but like the difference in priorities between like US companies and what they're looking for versus Japanese ones, because it isn't like Detective Conan isn't also geared to a younger audience in Japan too. So you would think that like the demographics would be really similar.
Well, Detective Conan has a much more broader audience in that it has a very big female fan base,
Mm-hmm.
and it also connects with families.
Oh, okay.
So
So
a
you're
lot of
saying so you're saying Conan is more directed towards like not just kids, but a general audience.
more in Japan, it's more of a general audience.
Okay,
Yes,
I got you.
like they'll have like Conan and Ran do sponsorships for like the Tokyo Olympics, or we're gonna do tie-ins with the local police department,
Mm-hmm.
which makes sense. Um,
If you do something bad, I'll arrest you. Because my name is Conan Edogawa.
He'd be more like I'll
Child
get
cop.
I'll get my police officer friend to arrest you. I'll do a I'll illustrate what you did wrong. But no, I think also just with the time frame of when it came out, like we were still in the mid 2000s of mecha was still really big, and this was before a more wider range of shows got more popular. So it was very much boy centric, I would argue. So I think it was hard to find an audience at the time.
I could definitely see that.
Surprisingly, the manga though has continued to still be released by Viz, both physically and digitally since 2004. They're up to volume 80 in the English releases. They are still very far behind from where the anime is. But they are still at a decent pace releasing the manga here in the States.
Do you know if that was continuous? Like, was there ever a hiatus for the manga being released in the U.S.?
I'm not quite sure.
Because if that was like a straight run, like throughout all this time, like that'd be really impressive.
It seems to me like they have. They might have taken breaks to space things out, but I'm just more surprised that because usually it's the anime that brings people to the manga, right?
Well, especially in the U.S. for sure.
In the U.S., yeah. But here, the manga was able to find enough of an audience to keep going, whereas the anime never really connected. But that doesn't mean that TMS isn't trying, because they've tried more recent efforts to get Conan / Case Closed back in the consciousness to U.S. fans. Such as they've been releasing more of the Conan movies digitally on platforms like Amazon Prime and iTunes and YouTube, the YouTube movie system. And they've been releasing more of the movies through Discotheque, a company both you and I enjoy their releases a lot.
Yep, they're my favorite company.
Yep. And right now they've been releasing a lot of more of the modern movies. Movies that have come out more recently in like 2017, 2015, 2016. And I think what they were pushing was everyone, if you're new to Conan, go see the episode 1 special, which is basically a compilation special that kind of gives you the origins of Conan. And so that way you're not intimidated by like the episode count. You can just see the special and get a sense of what Conan is.
Yeah, I think that's pretty wise, them finding things that are decent entry points into the franchise and going ahead and releasing those out first and seeing how they do, and then if those continue to do well, keep releasing more. Kind of like what they've been doing with Lupin for like years at this point.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that kind of with the trajectory Lupin has been going at, that Conan can get a similar trajectory where there's enough people that get really into it and buy the Discotheque releases and we keep getting the movies because there's enough movies uh, where there's I think now like 28 movies.
Wow.
So so you have enough material that you can do, and I think if I was a company, doing specials and the movie releases are the best way to go because um, I would find it very hard to think that people in the United States would want to buy over 1,000 episodes of Conan. Uh, I think that's a much better fit with a streaming service like Crunchyroll,
Hmm.
which Conan has had a very sporadic release in the United States, where at first it was through Funimation, and then they lost the rights, and then Netflix picked up a random season for at least a couple years, and then not Funimation, Crunchyroll, uh, have been releasing more of the newer episodes starting around, I think it's like 809, 810.
Hmm.
And they recently got the rights back to the first 130, which are now on Crunchyroll. But there's a major gap from it goes from like 1 to 130, then major gap, and then we go to episode 809. But I will say,
I seem to recall, wasn't it like that for One Piece on Crunchyroll for a while, a few years ago maybe?
I think it was where there was a big gap for a while, but
Hmm.
now One Piece is pretty much everywhere. Like
Hmm.
it's on Funimation's service, all of it, and it's on Crunchyroll, and they've kind of gotten the My Hero status where it's so big that you can't be contained on one service.
Hmm. Got to put it everywhere.
Got to put it everywhere. Um, but I will say one thing I really admire about Conan and slash Case Closed. I'm just gonna just I'm so used to just the Japanese name, so forgive me.
I will say though, just as a quick aside, I will say if considering that they did come up with a brand new title for the U.S., I think Case Closed is a really good title. Just from a total outsider's perspective, I think it's it's snappy. It's got alliteration, which is cool, and it does encompass sort of what the show is about. So I mean, I think considering they didn't go with Detective Conan and they gave it a new name with localization, I think they picked a pretty good one.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid name. It's just as someone that mainlined the Japanese release. I'm just used to the Japanese name, and I don't have the nostalgia for the Case Closed dub.
Mm-hmm.
Like you, I watched the first episode like in an anime club in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Liked it, but never watched it again until recently. Um, what was I'm losing my train of thought. Um, oh, my point. The Conan fans are devoted, which I greatly admire. It's kind of like how Jojo fans probably were before the anime got it to more mainstream status. Like, for example, there was a dedicated fan group called the Detective Conan Translation Project that uh, worked on creating an English translation for majority of the episodes and doing the movies when they weren't being released by Funimation.
Hmm.
And there's a great wiki called the Detective Conan World Wiki, which is its own. It's not part of the stupid fandom service. It's its own thing run by fans that are very detailed, and I highly admire the whoever is running the wiki. I use it a lot to look up interesting factoids.
Probably a bunch of nerds.
Yeah, welcome to the Nerd Club. But yeah, I think people that get into Detective Conan really get into it, and the main reason why I was able to plow through all the episodes was it's a really good character show because every character has a distinctive personality and character interactions, which can be really fun. The mystery, if you grew up on like stuff like Agatha Christie, like in her books or murder mystery books, you would really like Detective Conan. There's also a very strong romance element. So if you're big into romance, you get that. And during the movies, you get more action-oriented set pieces. So So it seems like Conan, for me, is able to kind of take the best of both worlds and kind of blend them all together into this soup.
So do you think there's an opportunity to get fans for this, new and up and coming series that people really like called Columbo to jump into the Detective Conan train?
Yeah, I would say if you also like Columbo, you'd probably like Detective Conan. Um, and if you are new to the series, I would highly recommend just checking out the movies that Discotheque has released or doing the episode 1 special, which gives you like a good summary of who the characters are. Um,
Or the film that you picked for me, which is not one of those at all.
well, I'll tell the reason why I picked this movie. We're doing movie 9, Strategy Above the Depths, which came out in 2005. I chose to do this movie because, unlike some of the newer movies they usually have like a major character in the Conan pantheon be a focal point. So, for example, they could do a black organization movie, or they'll do a movie with Conan's rival Heiji Hattori, or they'll do another movie with Kaito Kid involved. And so I picked this movie because this movie had the least amount of like need to know of like who's this character.
Hmm.
And also I picked it because unlike the later movies have that kind of you need to know this character syndrome, and the early movies uh, they didn't really have kind of their formula in place because the first Conan movie uh, is way more action oriented, which while fun is not kind of the Conan story structure that you're used to if you watch the TV show or the movies. So I thought this would be a good fit. And I'm hoping if the Discotheque releases are successful, they'll finally be able to get back to some of the earlier movies, which I really enjoy. So that's why I picked this movie. Also, CG water and CG boat.
Gotta love CG boat, huh?
Gotta love CG water. Now that I gave you a lot of background, listener, hopefully I didn't overwhelm you. Let's finally get into this movie. Detective Conan, Movie 9, Strategy Above the Depths. The main premise of this movie is Sonoko, best friend of Ran, is sent by her parents to represent them slash their conglomerate because Sonoko comes from a very wealthy family. They're brought on board this luxury cruise liner called what, Austin?
Saint Aphrodite, like the goddess.
Unbeknownst to Conan and friends, which include Ran, Mori, which is Ran's dad, and Conan's friends from elementary school, the Detective Boys, and Hybera and the Professor. There's two figures that are plotting revenge for a horrible accident that happened 15 years ago. And so incidents begin to occur on the cruise, and Conan and crew have to solve it. So, Austin, since this is your first real Conan movie, what did you think of it?
Well, generally speaking, I thought it was pretty good. I could definitely understand why you would like it because it gave me a lot of those Murder on the Orient Express kind of vibes because it's, like a localized ship situation where there are some mysterious deaths that occur and some crimes that are being committed and suspicious people around every corner. So I could definitely see this is very Bill Core, I think. But yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought, in line with, your intentions for giving me this particular film, I felt like the film gave me enough knowledge about all of the characters in order to kind of understand who they were and where they were coming from. And there was a very helpful sequence like towards the beginning where it basically gives you a digest of, like, this is Detective Conan up to this point. These are the general profiles of the characters, and we're going to tell you how Conan got turned from a teenager into a little boy really quickly, and just kind of give you this quick introduction to everybody to sort of set the stage. But I appreciated having that, but I don't know, I feel like maybe the film could have done without it. Not that I think it shouldn't have been included, but I think that like the characters were easy enough to understand their relationships to each other and to sort of the setting overall, that it didn't feel like jarring. I there weren't times where I was just like, well, who is this character? Like, why are they here? For the most part, I mean, I obviously don't understand everything about the characters in these relationships. Just like the detective boys and girl were like a little bit weird to me. I don't think I made the connection that they were like Conan's elementary school classmates. I just thought, well, who are these kids running around, and like, why are Ron and her friend just hanging out with all these children, and like, why is the doctor here? But like, a lot of those questions are just like ones I didn't really care about because they weren't immediately relevant to the plot of the story, I guess.
Well, okay. Fun fact. They do that recap for every movie.
Oh, good.
For every movie. So basically, I think if you're new to Conan, you can they will do a recap of that kind every time, and every time the recap is slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
I find that recap fun because the detective boys get this very over-the-top intro where they just like call out their names, and like a Super Sentai team form a pose. Mm-hmm. And the best part is when Genta says, "and with our associate Conan," because
yes.
Conan is the one that mostly solves it, and they're just kind of tag along.
Right.
which is really funny.
And they also made a point to showcase Conan's gadgetry to show you like, oh, these are the things he has access to. They'll most definitely come up later.
That are invented by the professor.
Yeah.
And the reason he's there is to basically watch over the detective boys. Because parents, what's that?
I know whenever we talk about Lupin the Third, you like to point out the weakest link of a story, and I think he's the weakest link to me.
Yeah, I would say it. There's always kind of a weakest link issue with Conan because you only have so much time, and you can only give so much to each of the characters because Conan has a very ensemble feel to it. And so there's always going to be bound to be someone left out. But he did get his trademark quiz that he gives the detective boys in almost every movie.
Oh.
So that is a recurring segment within all the movies. Is he gives them a quiz that's usually a pun. And that I feel so bad for the translators that have to translate that, because that's very much a cultural thing.
Yeah, we were watching a fan sub of this because, like you said, it's not available through standard means. But there were a lot of translator notes on this particular fan sub to clear up some of those things, which I appreciated.
And also another reason why you should like this movie is because one of your favorite voice actors, this is Megumi Hayashibara, is the voice of Haibara Ai.
Oh, really? Was she? Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice.
You didn't recognize her?
No, I have to be totally honest. I'm pretty bad about noticing Japanese seiyuu voices. That's probably a byproduct of me generally watching dubs most of the time. Not that I have any problem watching subs, but most of the time I watch stuff in English, but I just don't have the ear for it that you do.
But yeah, she was cast into Conan right after Ava.
That's amazing.
So she has been playing Haibara through the entire run.
That's awesome.
So, but I guess for you, did you like the character dynamics? Did you like the mystery?
I did. I thought that the central mystery was like, kind of standard. It wasn't anything mind-blowing, but it definitely reminded me of just like traditional mystery stories, and I see the enjoyment of them. But I did think this one was interesting because it's not really a whodunit. It's more of a Conan knows who did it already, but his struggle is that he doesn't have the evidence to prove it. And I thought
which
that
is
was
very much a which is very much a Columbo
yeah,
sort of conundrum where he
right.
knows who did it, but he has to find the clues to prove
Hmm.
it.
And then it has like a third act twist where you realize, oh, the central criminal that we were trying to follow all along isn't the only criminal. There's actually another one. And I thought that was kind of neat because around like the hour and 10-minute mark, because this movie is about an hour 45, it feels like they get to a stopping point pretty much. Like they capture the guy that we're led to believe is the villain the whole time, the killer, the guy who's trying to sabotage the ship, etc. They capture him, and then I was like, oh my gosh, it feels like this movie is almost over. But then sort of the tables turn, and then we're revealed that there was actually another villain going on the whole time, so they have to deal with that as well.
Yeah, I thought that was really fun and
Mm-hmm.
just like it's very much like, oh, it's this guy. Oh, no, it's not. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's this guy. Oh, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's a really fun mystery where you're basically opening up the secret door and you're just like, oh, I didn't expect that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I also liked about this movie is it has a lot of good character moments. Like a big one is uh, Maury Rand's dad, who's usually in the series played as a comic foil,
Mm-hmm.
because he in the series he's very much like he drinks a lot and he's played for comedy, and Conan has to use him as a cover to uh, basically do his speech declaring who the murderer is,
So,
and so
not to derail you, but about that really threw me off guard because I was like, why does Kona do this? Is like this a normal thing that he does to get to like communicate with people? And I'm guessing he does that
yes,
because if he knows that he does it as a child, nobody will take him seriously.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
So he usually the thing is with Mori at least is he will fire a sleeping dart at Mori. He'll fall asleep, and then using his bow tie voice changer, he'll under Mori's voice he will declare who the murderer is, and that's usually what happens in most Conan episodes.
Now I
And
don't know if it just wasn't present in this film, but I don't remember them doing a sleeping dart for either the professor or Mori at a single time in
they
this movie.
they don't. This is one of the few times that they don't do that.
So are they just
Uh,
expecting the audience to just sort of fill in the blank?
well, he's done the voice changer thing with other characters. Like he's done that with Sunoco,
Okay.
and he's done that with the professor knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason he does this is because as a child, I'm not going to be taken seriously, especially as an elementary school level child.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to use these more older characters in order to get my points across.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I like that he does is that he knows his kind of limitations as a child, and so he'll use that to his expertise. Like when he goes into one of the suspects' rooms and is like, I want to play. He's
Yes.
really going in there to find clues.
Yeah, I thought that was
And he,
brilliant. Like I really liked that because I was under the impression just from not really knowing much about the series that like oh, he is a kid trapped in a child's body, but he just acts like an adult and everybody understands that he's a famous detective, but it's actually not like that. It's like
no,
he's still limited by the fact that he's stuck in a kid's body.
yeah, he's basically limited where he has to give either like hints to the adults in the room that
Uh-huh.
kind of gives them the aha moment,
Mhm.
which also happens in this movie. Um, with when he's around the police detectives in that conference room.
Mhm.
Um, or he'll use his kid size to kind of get away with things that he couldn't do as a teenager.
Mhm.
And he is a teenager stuck in a kid's body, so he has to find workarounds in order to do his detective work.
Mhm. Yeah, and that particular scene that you talked about, I thought was really clever because it was him playing with, the fact that he can use his childlikeness to his advantage so that people don't suspect him of like trying to find the clues or the secrets or what have you.
Yeah. And Hybera is the same way, where she's also a young, an older person that is shrunken down, and so sometimes she will also have to use those skill sets as a workaround.
That was one thing that totally caught me off guard because I had no idea that there was another character in the Conan universe that was basically the same as him, like with the whole I'm an adult trapped in a child's body kind of thing. So that really took me off guard for sure. Not necessarily in a
Yeah,
bad way. I was just really surprised.
she's introduced in the third season, so relatively early on, and she was also dubbed in the Funimation dub at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Also in one of the movies. So she's early on in the show, but yeah, there's one or two characters that are in the same situation as Conan, without going into too much detail.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So I guess.
and
Well, go ahead.
you go ahead. Go.
Well, I was gonna say, I guess this is probably a conversation that happens a lot in the Conan community, or maybe you've all accepted that there is no answer and you've just decided to enjoy the ride anyway. It's like, how much should the audience really care about getting invested in Conan and by extension Hybera, like eventually being able to return to their normal bodies?
I think for most people, they enjoy the long-term story, but they're relatively fine with Case of the Week because it's been over 30 years, and if this was done in real time, he would have been able to age up to his normal age twice at this point.
Yep.
And it's very much like, it's funny because Conan takes a lot of tropes from comic books. It feels like, because it's like time is nebulous in Conan, because in the book it's only been a year, but with the anime they'll give him newer technology that is of today, and newer vehicles and stuff, and also his relationship with Ran is very much like Superman Clark Kent with Lois. And that, I cannot reveal my secret identity or else Ran will be in trouble. So, and there's always this will they, won't they dichotomy between the two of them.
Yeah, I could definitely see how that would be a little bit frustrating if you decide to watch this show as a linear story, rather than just a series of episodic adventures. So I guess if you go into it with the right expectation of no, it's just about the journey, not about the destination, then I could see you wrapping your head around that and not being irritated when the overarching plot never progresses.
Yeah, where the overarching plot progresses in very slow chunks. It's very much like those USA Network shows where it's Case of the Week. We might touch on the main story, but it's not the focus. So if you're used to those type of shows, then you probably dig into Conan in terms of the format.
Sorry, I had another question about Ron. So she well, first of all, why does she hang out with them? What's her deal? Okay, so
Okay.
she's Mori's daughter, right?
Yes.
And so
Sonoko is her best friend.
right, and why do they hang out with Conan?
Because they're basically the caretakers of Conan.
Why?
It's really explained. They
Don't explain it.
They just basically take care of him.
Okay.
Because we're in the past, Conan is has had his parents under disguise, basically say can you take care of him while we're away, and they're sure.
Okay, so they're just long-term babysitting him for his parents that are never coming back?
Yes.
Okay.
Basically.
And where do they think that what is his
Shinichi
name?
is?
Shinichi is? Yeah, where do they think he is?
He's always well, I'm on a case. I'm always on a long-term case.
Forever.
And the way that the way that Rand communicates with Shinichi is through the phone.
Okay. I guess she talks about that in the movie, but that never actually happens as far as I could tell.
Yeah, it's not a big central point of this movie.
Okay, yeah. I kind of gathered that that's what they were doing because she was talking about him, like, not like he's dead or whatever, but that he's just, like, busy and far away, and she's, like, pining for him.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that kind of makes sense, I guess. But,
Because
yeah.
she thinks like, oh, this he's a mystery geek that is always just focused on the case, and that's all he can focus on.
Peter, where were you all last night? At the library, totally not fighting the Green Goblin.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think he is an American comic book fan, but there's a lot of American comic book tropes that are in Detective Conan,
Well, definitely the sort of sliding time scale is definitely one of those things.
and also the kind of the Superman Lois Lane dynamic
Yeah.
with Conan and Rand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say we got to talk about the CGI.
Okay. I mean, it was 2005, man. Like,
Okay, I was wondering just like your take on it, because it's just like I forgot about the CG in this movie.
yeah, I mean, going into this, I just told you to pick me a random film, like from the Conan series overall. So I knew to expect basically anything from the late 90s to modern day. So that could have been anything in terms of the animation spectrum. But I do think it's interesting that you probably, now I haven't seen them, but you probably picked one of the ugliest looking ones just because it was made in the early 2000s, where anime of that time period just did not look good.
No, and the problem was like I would have wanted to do like one where it's more traditional 2D animation, which are in like the first 4 movies, but they're not. They kind of didn't find the formula until later. And I kind of wanted to give you more of a traditional Conan experience. And while the later ones look better, I didn't want to bog you down with another major character.
No, I totally respect your reasoning in that regard, but I just think it's funny in hindsight that you ended up handing me one of probably the ugliest ones. But that being said, for a film that came out when it did in that early 2000s digipaint animation style with kind of so-so CG. I mean, I thought the animation itself was really good, like especially in the very end, like the fist fight between Mori and our secondary, or maybe I guess even primary villain. Like whenever they have that fist fight together, I thought that was really well animated.
Yeah, I would say like all the 2D stuff is good. Like it's not going to blow your mind, but it's solid work.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it's probably better than what like an average episode of the Conan TV show looks like. But
yeah,
it's not amazing.
The big difference between the movies and the TV show is they have more action-oriented segments. Because it's a movie. We want to get you excited. So in this movie, for example, at the big finale with the boat exploding and them having the big fight on the boat and them trying to escape it, they could not do that on a TV budget.
Right. And, I was just kind of kidding around in the beginning whenever I said we were going to be watching James Cameron's Titanic, but it honestly really feels like it was heavily inspired by the Titanic, if not the movie, like the event, or probably both, honestly, because you start out with our flashback scene in the very beginning where the cruise ship literally hits an iceberg and then, like, sinks after also being exploded. They blew it up and rammed it into a iceberg, but then like around the halfway point of the film, like a big twist happens and the current cruise ship in the modern day that they're all on also has bombs on it and they detonate, so the ship is slowly sinking, just like what happens in the Titanic movie. And then there's a whole bunch of sequences of them like trying to get off the boat, and like there's a bunch of scenes like in the lower cabins where like water's breaking through in the rooms, and I could just hear that that string band from Titanic just playing that sad songs.
Gentlemen, it's been an honor.
Yeah, I was like honestly a little shocked that there wasn't a string band saying, "Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure serving with you." And Billy Zane was not running around the bottom of the ship looking for his girlfriend that doesn't like him.
He was too busy doing Kingdom Hearts VO.
I guess so.
But what did you think of just the action sequence in general? I really enjoyed it. Like, I loved that more. I loved kind of the big thing that I took away from this movie rewatching it was just Maury's arc
Mm-hmm.
in this movie, because he's usually played for a bumbling idiot
Mm-hmm.
and played for comedy, but this time he played it serious, which is rare
Mm-hmm.
in the Conan movies and TV. So like when he has the confrontation with our main bad guy, and he's like, "I tried really hard to find somebody else, but it kept pointing to you," and that line at the end where she's like, "Well, you must have hated me," or someone you love that you hated, and I'm like, quite the opposite. You
Mm-hmm.
look too much like her, of his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really well done.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I mean, I know he's not typically like this, but the way that Maury was in this movie reminded me of a lot of the interpretations of Lupin, like where
Mm-hmm.
he is a goofball and kind of lecherous and kind of a jerk at times and very very silly, but he can easily turn on a dime and be like super like analytical and suave and competent in a fight and all that stuff. So that's really what Maury's character reminded me a lot of in this movie.
And I guess my other plot point: what did you think about Rand going back onto the boat to get the necklace?
Well, again, around that time, I looked at the clock for the film, and I'm just like, all right, so we have to, we have a time frame in which this film must last. We have to give us a reason to get back onto the ship because in addition to resolving the secondary villain, so there has to be something else to make sure that there's enough action to last us for the duration of the film. So I thought, well, I guess that makes sense that here at the beginning of the third act, she has to get off of the safety raft, get back on the ship, and of course she gets like knocked out or whatever or trapped. I can't remember. No, she hits her head on the wall. Um,
Yeah, because the ship goes tipsy, and because of that, it causes like the door to
mhm.
hit her head,
Yeah,
which then kind of knocks her out, and she's basically stuck in this container
yeah, and
for a good chunk of the movie.
I can understand what they were going for, but I mean, as kind of a knock against the animation or the staging in this particular scene, it did not look like she got hit hard enough to get knocked out. It just didn't. So you have to use a little bit of suspension of
well,
disbelief.
well, when I watched the movie for the first time, I laughed because it's just like, but it's a necklace that like the detective boys can make anywhere.
But that's the thing, Bill. They're trying to pull on your heartstrings. It's an important sentimental item for this young
Is
teenage
it?
girl.
Is it though?
I, to her it is. To you, you have no sentimentality. You're just a cold-hearted jerk.
I guess. But I find it funny that she was just like, oh yeah, the ship's sinking, but I need the necklace back.
It was pretty funny. And again, I guess another reference to Titanic. You know, she goes back for a necklace. I mean, you know, got to
Oh
complete the
my
circle.
god, I forgot the Hope Diamond. I forgot about that. Oh man, you're right. There's so many Titanic references in this movie I didn't realize.
Yep, yep.
Um, I will. I guess. Do you have a favorite character of the Conan cast that you
Oh,
liked?
gosh, let's see. I mean, I feel like some of them I didn't really get a good chance to kind of grasp. Like the professor, for example. I feel like, again, because he's kind of the weakest link, I didn't really get much from him. I did like the the one policeman, the detective. He was pretty cool. I feel like he could have used a
Oh,
little bit more screen
the
time.
oh oh so I feel so dumb because he's in every TV episode.
Hmm.
Um,
I also liked. I don't know if I really liked their characters a whole much because they don't really do a whole lot. But like, I generally liked Ron and I generally liked Sonoko and like their friendship chemistry with each other. I thought their scenes together were pretty cute and fun. They seem to just be really good friends, and I think the script really sells that.
yeah, where it's just teasing of each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're just lovingly poking fun at each other and like talking back and forth and having earnest conversations and stuff like that. So I liked that. Um, the Detective Boys didn't really do much for me either way. Conan himself is about how I expected him to be. Um, but I don't know. I can't really pick an all-star character in the film. I guess the villains were just okay, I thought. Um, Nothing really super stands out. I mean, but I enjoyed it overall.
For me, as a longtime Conan fan, I really enjoyed Mori's arc,
Mm-hmm.
and I really enjoyed the Detective Boys, just because they had some good funny moments, like them playing hide and seek
Mm-hmm.
was fun, and the the scene, anything with Hyber interacting with them, because she's such as a cool personality,
Mm-hmm.
and because she has a much more mature personality, it can throw them off at times,
Mm-hmm.
which can be fun.
Yeah, the contrast
Um,
between like the actual elementary school kids and like the fake elementary school kids who are actually teenagers, that's pretty fun. I like that.
yeah,
I will say it made me wonder, do all cruise ships have a morgue? I guess they probably should.
I would. I wonder
Yeah, I mean, I would
if
think
on
so.
on a Disney cruise, do you think there's a Mickey Mouse morgue that they label?
It's also in the shape of Mickey's head, like they just cradle the corpse like in a circle in like one of his ears. No, but yeah, I would have to think that
Oh
they
boy,
do
turn on
because
the
like
fire!
what if someone passes away on the ship? I mean, you gotta have a place to store the body.
Yeah, I mean, because it's basically a ship is its own major. It's basically a city.
Yeah, exactly. Like so you would think they at least have like a few slots if people unexpectedly pass away on a cruise ship. Um, but that just threw me for a loop because whenever you think cruise ships, you don't think of there being a morgue there, but I guess there probably are.
And I guess, unless you have any other points about the movie you want to talk about,
Mhm.
would you watch another Conan movie?
I think I would definitely watch another Detective Conan movie. I don't think that this has necessarily inspired me to want to really get into the franchise overall. Like, I don't feel compelled to have the desire to sit down and watch all of that content, but as a general premise, I think I enjoy Conan, and if another friend named Bill Foreman wanted to curate for me another good Conan film to check out, I would absolutely watch it.
I guess the last few factoids I'll give you is, did you enjoy the live action credits?
I thought that was interesting. And I bet I was thinking of that. I was like, oh, they probably went on a cruise as a production company or as like the animation team to get references for how they wanted the cruise ship to look. So I was imagining that they probably shot that footage on location while they were doing that. I mean, I might be totally wrong, but that's kind of what the vibes
Well,
gave me.
funny thing, they do a live action credits for every single movie.
Really, that's interesting. That's a
Yes.
very interesting motif.
And it's usually tied to the premise of the movie. So like this one, it was a lot of
Okay.
live action shots of this woman walking around on a boat.
Hmm.
Another one that they did was they went to they did one on an airplane. So we're gonna show you a picture of planes taking off at an airport.
Hmm. That's kind of
Where
cool.
we went to Thailand for one movie. So here's a bunch of images of Thailand.
That's pretty cool. It kind of reminds me of the end credits of like Foolie Cooley and His and Hers Circumstances, where it's just like,
Yep.
you know, the physical spaces where these characters would be inhabiting. It's like, this is what it would look like if they were actually here.
And I guess my last factoid I forgot to mention, which was fun, is the voice of Conan is the one of the main singers of Two Mix, who did the Just Communication Gundam Wing
Oh,
song.
very nice.
And I did not know this until I did research for this pod. She was married for a few years to the mangaka or the manga creator of Detective Conan.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yes, that was they divorced though, but they were married for a number of years.
Well, I
Okay.
guess both of them brought work home too much, so I guess the relationship didn't work out.
Maybe. And she is also the voice of Kiki in Kiki's Delivery Service.
Very cool. I could definitely see that.
So.
She definitely sells. I mean, most young boy characters are voiced by women, but she definitely sold the idea of, playing a young boy character, like 100%.
Yeah, it's funny. They've been because they've been doing the roles for so long. The cast have kind of become best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Especially Megumi Hayashibara with the voice of Conan and Ran, and they're all female voice actresses, and they're like in their 50s voicing 10-year-old boys and teenagers. So it's funny to think about.
I mean, Makoto Nozawa is still out there voicing Goku, so. And she's like, she's at least 150 years old.
And I think the voice of Luffy said, I want her to voice Luffy if I can't do it anymore.
Oh, that's funny.
And she's like, but you're 50, and she's like 80. So, but I'm glad you enjoyed the Conan movie for the most part.
I did. It was a good primer getting me into the series, and, it just being such a big staple of, anime and manga history, and still such a big influence and a part of anime and manga today. I think the more familiarity I have, at least on a basic level with Conan, the more anime literate I feel.
Well, I think with that we'll wrap it up, and we'll do some plugs and any other news that we must announce about the podcast. So, Austin, where can people find you?
People can find me most easily over on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @BebopShock. You can also find us more generally over on our website, thirdimpactanime.com.
Nice. And instead of doing a plug for my Twitter, I would like to give a plug to a podcast. If you're interested in Detective Conan and want more content about it, you should check out the One Podcast Prevails podcast, which is part of the Manga Mavericks network of podcasts. From what I have listened to, they do movie reviews, and they mostly do manga recap. So I highly enjoy their work, so I would highly recommend you go check them out at One Podcast Prevails.
Awesome. And yeah, if you want to follow us more generally over on Twitter, we do have a brand Twitter account, which is @TI_anime. And if you want to help us keep the lights on, we do have a Patreon, because of course we do, and that's patreon.com/thirdimpactanime.
And with that, thank you, dear listener. Thanks for letting me be host, Austin.
Oh, of course.
This was exciting.
Please do it more often. It gives me a wonderful break.
Maybe. We just need to do more Lupin episodes, maybe.
Soon we will.
Soon. And with that, we'll see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.